Alright, ladies and gentlemen, Baron here. Now I'm going to be showing off Total War Rome 2's campaign map planner. Now if you hover your mouse over any of these regions, it will say its settlement name, which province that region belongs to, where the provincial capital is, the controlling faction, what mercenaries you can hire there, as well as if it's one of the main or playable factions, who they're at war with, if there's any specific resources unique to that area, such as elephants, wine, sanctuary of the gods, like whether there's a wonder or something like that, oracle of Amun-Re, stuff like that. Pretty interesting little details. Purple dye, wheat, all kinds of individual resources. So they're putting this out to kind of allow you to plan your campaign, which is pretty cool because you can become very familiar with the campaign map prior to playing. So a little bit of information. And the link for this will be in the video description, so check that out while you're listening in order to plan your campaign. But there's 183 regions, and there's 57 provinces. Now, a province can have up to 4 regions within it. For example, if you look at the Italian peninsula, that main province in the middle there, Italia, it has 4 different regions. You have Ariminum, Velathri, Roma, and Neapolis. And Roma is the provincial capital of that province. So that would mean that Roma would have, a very bigger city with walls, and that would be where your siege would take place. Because you can take individual regions without owning the province, and many of the smaller regions, that don't have the provincial capital won't be siege battles, and that will kind of break up the monotony that you experienced in Rome Total War and other Total War games, where each time you wanted to take a territory, you had to do this epic siege battle. So this way it kind of breaks it up. You have a lot more land battles instead of just a lot of sieging over and over and over. So now you want to control an entire province because it will give various benefits to you. One of which is you can pass provincial edicts, and that has bonuses for the entire province and all of the individual regions of that province. And these can come and boost to production levels in the regions or public happiness. Also, if you allow public happiness to drop within a province that you own all of it, generally if it drops too low, the least happy of those regions can rebel against you. So that adds kind of political depth to the game. And another thing that you can do is called raiding. And basically, whether it be your controlled territory or an enemy controlled territory, since they've gotten rid of all of the individual production buildings and smaller villages like you found in Empire Total War, where you'd send your army to raid a port or raid a farm or something like that, that was kind of micro intensive. It's kind of more passive. You put your army in that region and you can set them to raid, and they will passively loot the area, and that has a benefit in that it decreases the upkeep cost of that army. Now you can do it in your own controlled territory, which will decrease the happiness within that territory, so they may revolt against you. And you can do that in enemy territory to harass, force them to kind of fight out in the battle, say they're hanging back in their walled city, and things like that. So pretty interesting little feature there. Now with regards to the campaign map, there's going to be over 117 different factions, minor nations, rebel armies, just neighbors you have, political friends and enemies with minor nations all around you. So that will be really interesting. And each of these factions will have their own agendas, and many have different styles, how they kind of proceed within the game. Are they going to be militaristic, expansionistic, kind of more defensive and turtle up? Are they going to be diplomatic? Or are they going to be trade oriented? Are they going to try to, so you can create allies and enemies that will have different kind of play styles to them. And then of all the factions, there's three main cultural groups that the factions will fall into, whether they're Greco-Roman, like the Romans, the Macedonians, Epirites, Athenians, Spartans, Egyptians, and Carthage and Pontus, or are they barbarian, like the Iceni, the Averni, and Suebi, or are they kind of Eastern, like the Parthians? And that kind of affects like cultural things as well as militaristic styles. Do they rely more on strong martial tradition and tactics and formations, or are they cavalry based? All of these different things play into the character of each of the factions. Now, some of the main factions, there's obviously Rome, and Rome will have political depth to it in that there will be three influential families. The Julii, Junii, and Cornelii, I think is how you pronounce it, but feel free to correct me in the comments. And that kind of plays into the whole famous Roman Senate. These three different families, I think you're going to kind of have to balance their power because each one will probably have different advantages, but you can't allow one to get too powerful or they may try to overthrow you or start a rebellion or something like that. And if any one of a senator or a general becomes too famous or too powerful, you can kind of give him an army and send him off to go fight, kind of get him out of the Italian peninsula and out of your hair. But that may give him too much power as well. So it's kind of going to be interesting, the political depth that you have when playing as the Romans. And then there's Carthage. And Carthage will have a strong navy. They're traditionally the sworn enemy of Rome. So it'll be interesting to see, do you ally with Carthage? Do you fight Carthage? Or are you going to play Carthage? And Carthage will be ruled by one of three political powers, which is kind of similar to the Romans, but a little different. And then I don't think you really have to worry about any one of those families becoming too powerful, because each of those families will have different military or economic bonuses depending on which you choose to run Carthage. And Carthage also has the very unique military unit, the war elephant, which was the tank of the ancient world. Then you have Macedon, which is one of the richest and most powerful of the Hellenic factions. And Macedon has a very strong army, but not a very good navy, so they would rely on an alliance with, say, Athens to kind of really give them a lot of balance within army and navy. Then you have the barbarian factions, the Iceni, Averni, and Suebi. And the Averni, which are a Celtic tribe in Gaul, they're kind of stronger economically and more trade-oriented than most of the other barbarian factions. Then you have the Parthians over in the east, and they rely on heavy cataphract cavalry, really armored cavalry units, and then their mercenary units. You have Egypt, and Egypt seems to have the biggest starting location of all of the playable factions so far, and they're more Hellenic, so they kind of have a lot of Macedonian and Greek influence within their culture and their military units, but unlike, those of the Greek peninsula, they have access to a lot of more exotic units like war elephants and war chariots and stuff like that, as well as African mercenaries. And then you have Pontus, which is on the Black Sea, and the people from Pontus, they're kind of more trade and wealth oriented. They have a strong navy and a strong trade fleet, so they can become rather wealth from trade. And they're not as developed, well, they're very prosperous, very wealthy as a result of their trade positions. Then you have Athens, which is one of the most prominent naval powers and the most prominent naval power within Greece. They're very wealthy, and similar to Pontus, they get a lot of their money off of trade, and they support their trade with a strong navy. But their army is not very well developed. Then you have Epirus, which is kind of unique to the Hellenic factions. It's an agrarian nation, so they generally don't have one big city like Athens or Sparta which are named after their city-state. And they, as they're an agrarian nation, they have a lot of smaller cities, smaller settlements, and they have heavy cavalry, good skirmishers, and then they have spear phalanxes, pike phalanxes, and their commanders have a greater command radius. Then you have the Spartans. Everyone knows about the Spartans. Probably one of the strongest individual military units in the game will be the Spartan hoplites. So you can kind of mess around with the campaign map and click and kind of plan where you want to take over, kind of decide and get a good idea of which nations you may want to ally with and which nations you want to play. I'm not really sure which nation I want to play right now. Open to suggestions. Kind of leaning towards one of the more Hellenic factions as they're kind of centrally located. Pontus and Egypt are pretty interesting in that you have those strong Hellenic military units, but you have access to more exotic units as well as having a strong navy, so they seem to be pretty good all around. Not really sure at this point. Anyway, I'm Baron, and thanks for watching. And here we have Greece. You can see right in front of us there is a Roman legion faced off against an army with a lambda, and that is for Lacedaemon or Sparta. So if you're a fan of really badass assault troops, or just troops in general, the Spartans are probably the cream of the crop, and I think they were, if not one of two best units in the first Rome game.